Look at the man on your screen, crying and begging for his family's safe return on national television. Behind that pitiful performance and forced smile lies a horrifying truth. He had just slaughtered his pregnant wife and 2 little girls, dumping their bodies into freezing crude oil tanks. Why would a seemingly perfect father annihilate his entire family and lie so effortlessly to the whole world? To unmask this monster, we have to rewind to a time when this tragedy was still the picture-perfect American dream. Social media is the ultimate stage for beautifully crafted lies, and the Watts family's Facebook page was a flawless masterpiece. If you scrolled through their sun-drenched photos, you would be blinded by an unbelievably perfect life. You would see a sprawling, proud suburban home in Colorado and expensive, laughter-filled family vacations. You would see 2 little princesses constantly dressed in vibrant matching outfits, and most noticeably, a gentle husband who always looked at his wife with sheer adoration. To his neighbors and friends, Chris Watts was the monument of a model family man. Quiet, hardworking, and seemingly incapable of ever raising his voice at his loved ones. However, no wall is completely immune to rotting from the inside out. Behind the radiant smiles on the internet, the Watts family was drowning in a dark swamp of massive debt. Their financial picture was actually a patched-together series of loans, pushing them right to the edge of total bankruptcy. And the lavish parties and sparkling designer clothes were nothing more than a fragile facade meant to conceal the absolute exhaustion that was eating away at them every single day. The crushing weight of money didn't just drain their energy. It slowly suffocated the atmosphere in the house, turning their home into an invisible, stifling cage. Inside that dark cage, Shanann, with her strong personality and tendency to micromanage, inadvertently backed her introverted husband into a corner. Instead of communicating, Chris chose to retreat into his shell. The emotional distance and coldness grew heavier after every silent dinner. He began turning to the gym like a wild, bloodthirsty animal, turning weightlifting into a dangerous obsession to escape his dead-end reality. While Chris's physical body grew increasingly muscular and imposing, yet the final moral foundations within his soul were crumbling, making way for a restless demon demanding to be awakened. And then, that demon found its light when Chris secretly fell into the arms of Nicole Kessinger, a young, fiery co-worker. For a man suffocating in his marriage, the alluring freedom and sweet praises from his mistress acted like a potent drug. It awakened the most primal, dark desires inside him. He suddenly felt a chilling disgust for his reality. He no longer wanted to break his back paying off debts, nor did he care to play the perfect husband in a glass display case anymore. A bone-chilling thought began to take root in his mind. He desperately craved to entirely erase his past, to start a brand new life with his lover. The depression, the deep-rooted selfishness, and the physical lust, intertwined tightly, are creating a ticking time bomb inside the head of this terrible man. It only needed the faintest spark for everything to blow up into ashes. And that fateful spark was ignited on a cold, incredibly silent morning in early August. Skipping past the darkest hours of that fateful night, our lens shifts straight to the early hours of August 13th. Shanann had just returned from a long business trip in Arizona, dropped off at her front door by her close friend Nicole Atkinson at nearly 2 in the morning. The atmosphere was perfectly peaceful, with absolutely no signs indicating this would be the last time Nicole would see her friend alive. The mystery officially unfolded when the sun came up, bringing with it a bone-chilling silence that blanketed the house at 2825 Saratoga Trail. That morning, and every attempt to contact Shanann vanished into the void. Frantic calls went straight to voicemail, and desperate text messages were met with deafening silence. Trusting her gut that something was terribly wrong, Nicole decided to rush straight to her friend's house to check on her. Standing on the front porch, Nicole's heart hammered against her chest as she noticed Shanann's shoes sitting completely untouched by the door. Peering through the window, she saw her friend's car parked neatly in the garage, yet every single entrance to the home was bolted shut from the inside. Not a single sound, not a soul in sight. An eerie, terrifying emptiness began to suffocate the panicked friend. In stark contrast to Nicole's absolute terror, the reaction from the husband, Chris Watts, was a bizarre and incomprehensible indifference. When he received the call that his pregnant wife and children were missing, instead of rushing home in a panic like any normal father would, Chris appeared incredibly unbothered. He made excuses about being busy at a work site and drove back at an agonizingly slow, almost comical pace. The sheer apathy and eerie calmness radiating from Chris while his family had seemingly vanished into thin air wasn't just a red flag. It was a silent confession of the dark truth he was desperately hiding. Chris's terrifying composure forced Nicole to call the police, and as the officers stepped through the doors of the Watts family home, their body cams unknowingly captured the very footage that would expose a monster. Under the sweep of flashlights down the darkened hallways, the police carefully searched every corner of the house. The crime scene immediately laid bare massive contradictions that shattered Chris's fabricated story of his wife simply packing up and running away. Shanann's purse, wallet, and all her IDs were left completely untouched on the kitchen counter. Her cell phone was found shoved deep between the sofa cushions, and most importantly, her essential pregnancy medications hadn't been touched at all. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle, forced entry, or a fight. Everything was far too neat, far too organized, as if the mother and her two little girls had simply evaporated into thin air in the middle of their sleep. While the officers were busy examining the scene, the body cam silently recorded Chris Watts's incredibly clumsy performance. He paced around the house like a restless shuttle, his arms constantly crossed tightly over his chest, creating an invisible defensive barricade. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting wildly around the room, desperately avoiding any direct eye contact with the police. Even the family dog, an animal highly sensitive to dark energy, appeared terrified, constantly backing away and growling whenever its owner stepped too close. Chris's body language was screaming a completely different story from the innocent victim role he was trying to mold. But the true crushing blow that shattered Chris's entire theatrical act came from a sharp-eyed neighbor. When the police knocked on the door next door to review their security camera, the color instantly drained from Chris's face. The grainy black and white footage clearly displayed a fatal mistake. In the early hours of the morning, Chris had backed his pickup truck deep into his driveway, right up to the garage doors. It was a habit he had never, ever done before. The truck sat there for nearly 50 minutes, more than enough time for a killer to casually load his secret, gruesome cargo without any prying eyes. In the exact moment the tape was played, Chris's eyes were glued to the screen, his hands clutching his head and neck in a state of sheer, unhideable panic. These clumsy, desperate lies could not slip past the veteran investigators. The FBI and the CBI officially stepped into the arena, preparing to set a psychological trap that he would never be able to escape. The heavy steel doors of the interrogation room slammed shut, entirely isolating Chris Watts from the outside world. This arrogant man had willingly walked into a psychological trap meticulously set by the veteran minds of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the FBI. Desperate to prove his fabricated innocence and maintain his good guy facade, Chris agreed to sit in the dreaded polygraph chair. He naively believed that by keeping a straight face, a steady heartbeat, and a calm demeanor, he could easily outsmart the labyrinth of sensors and wires strapped across his chest and fingers. Hours dragged on in a suffocating, unbearable silence beneath the stark fluorescent lights, as the machine relentlessly recorded every microscopic tremor of his deceit. Throughout this grueling, multi-hour process, the seasoned investigators executed a brilliant and devastating psychological warfare. On one hand, they played the role of sympathetic friends, pretending to deeply understand the crushing financial pressures and marital struggles of a family man. They created a comforting illusion that they were on his side, just trying to help him untangle a massive misunderstanding. On the other hand, they relentlessly fired razor-sharp questions, piercing directly through the glaring blind spots and inconsistencies in his timeline, backing him into a corner of undeniable, terrifying truths. Under the invisible, crushing weight of these professional interrogators, Chris's suppressed mental state began to show massive, irreparable cracks. The sweat forming on his brow proved he slowly realized he was no longer the director of his own twisted play. And then, the ultimate moment of truth arrived to shatter his remaining illusions. The detectives forcefully slammed the polygraph results onto the metal table, boldly declaring that Chris had failed the test with absolutely disastrous scores, exposing a level of deception that was off the charts. Sensing the suspect's psychological defenses crumbling rapidly, the police delivered their final, fatal blow. They opened the door and allowed Chris's own father to step into the frigid interrogation room. Coming face to face with the man who raised him, the cold-blooded killer's strongest fortress finally collapsed entirely, giving way to the first genuine, pathetic tears he had shed since the nightmare began. Knowing he could no longer play the role of the innocent, heartbroken husband waiting for his family to come home, Chris slumped forward in utter defeat. But even as he prepared to finally confess to the unspeakable, he managed to craft one last, venomous dagger, aiming it straight at the memory of his deceased wife. Amidst his pathetic, trembling sobs in his father's arms, Chris Watts uttered a half-truth confession, setting the stage for one of the most cowardly and cruel betrayals in the history of criminal justice. He finally admitted that his own hands had choked the life out of Shanann, but he vehemently and aggressively denied murdering his two little girls. Cornered and desperate, the shameless killer wove a brand-new, pitch-black narrative. He claimed that after an explosive, emotional argument where he demanded a separation, he walked into the children's bedroom and watched in sheer horror through the baby monitor as Shanann ruthlessly strangled their own daughters. With this incredibly venomous and calculated script, Chris desperately tried to wash the innocent blood from his hands, cloaking himself in the pathetic disguise of a tragic victim, pushed to the absolute psychological brink. He justified his gruesome actions to his father, insisting that murdering his pregnant wife was merely an explosion of ultimate, uncontrollable grief. He painted himself as a gentle, loving father who was blinded by a sudden rage after witnessing his precious babies being slaughtered by an unhinged mother. Every single word he spoke was meticulously calculated, aimed directly at the vulnerability of the grieving grandfather sitting across from him, and seeking a grotesque sympathy for an unforgivable, monstrous crime. When these deceitful, sickening words leaked to the press, they instantly triggered a massive media earthquake, sweeping across national television headlines and igniting a fierce, toxic storm of controversy online. Chris's slander acted like a potent poison that deeply divided the American public and the true crime community. A vocal fraction of society, already harboring deep-seated biases about Shanann's controlling personality based entirely on her curated social media videos, actually began to point their fingers at the grieving mother. In a devastating tragedy layered upon an already horrific crime, the true victim was once again dissected, judged, and stripped of her dignity by thousands of strangers, even as she lay cold and silent in a shallow, unmarked grave. Chris genuinely believed this vile, victim-blaming lie would salvage a tiny shred of his reputation, maintain his family's love, and perhaps spare him from the lethal injection needle. But he tragically forgot one crucial, undeniable rule of criminal investigation. The dead cannot speak to defend themselves, but the silent evidence left behind at a crime scene always will. Guided by the chilling confession of Chris Watts, law enforcement and forensic teams descended upon the desolate, wind-swept plains of the Survey 319 oil battery. Amidst the suffocating stench of harsh chemicals and the heavy air of death, a scene of unimaginable horror slowly emerged from the barren dirt. In a hastily dug, incredibly shallow grave, discarded like absolute trash in the middle of nowhere, investigators discovered the body of Shanann. She was curled in a heartbreaking fetal position, forever embracing her unborn son, Nico, who would never get the chance to take his first breath. The radiant, picture-perfect American dream had been violently reduced to a cold, unmarked tomb in the dirt. But the most haunting and stomach-churning discovery for the hardened recovery teams lay hidden inside the towering and massive crude oil tanks looming just steps away. Submerged in the thick, toxic, and pitch-black sludge, they painstakingly recovered the tiny bodies of little Bella and Celeste. The sheer diameter of the thief hatches at the top of those enormous tanks measured a mere 8 inches across, an incredibly tight space that defied logic. This horrifying detail became the ultimate testament to the boundless cruelty of a father, who aggressively forced his own flesh and blood through that tiny metallic opening just to bury his unspeakable sins beneath gallons of industrial crude. The silenced voices from the grave finally spoke their truth through the meticulous blades of the forensic pathologists, becoming the ironclad witnesses that completely obliterated Chris's cowardly slander. The autopsy reports delivered a crushing blow to his narrative, clearly proving that Shanann had absolutely no defensive wounds or signs of a struggle, and most importantly, she had never laid a hand on her children. The medical examiners found crude oil in the stomachs and lungs of the 2 little girls, alongside terrifying evidence of blunt force trauma and smothering. This definitive, undeniable scientific proof confirmed a truth so painful it shook the nation. The girls were still alive, or had just taken their final breaths at the hands of their father when they were shoved into those dark, suffocating tanks. The devastating reality of that fateful night was finally pieced together under the glaring light of justice. In the dead of night, Chris had coldly and methodically strangled his pregnant wife in the very bed they once shared. Even more monstrously, and he loaded her lifeless body into the back of his work truck, then forced his 2 bewildered, terrified little girls into the back seat to sit with their dead mother. That agonizing 45-minute drive into the pitch-black wilderness was the final journey for the Watts family. Ignoring the innocent, fearful questions of his oldest daughter, the monster wearing their father's face brutally extinguished their lives one by one in the shadows of the oil rigs. The theatrical curtain of lies had been violently ripped down, leaving the killer completely exposed to the world. The monster now faced only 2 grim choices: stare down the barrel of a lethal injection needle, or bow his head and accept the ultimate punishment for his unforgivable atrocities. Encornered by the impenetrable fortress of forensic evidence and his own crumbling narrative, the deceptive mask of Chris Watts shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Knowing there was absolutely nowhere left to run and no loopholes left to exploit, the once arrogant man finally lowered his head and pleaded guilty to all charges. A desperate and cowardly move solely to spare his own life from the death penalty. The sentencing hearing unfolded in a courtroom heavy with suffocating grief and the boiling, palpable outrage of the entire American public, as every chilling, cold-blooded detail of the annihilation was laid bare before millions of judging eyes. Yet the moment that commanded the most tears and broke the hearts of everyone watching wasn't the pathetic whimpering of the killer, but the gut-wrenching. A powerful grace displayed by the victim's family. Standing before the judge, Shanann's parents and brother swallowed their unimaginable agony, mourning the simultaneous loss of a vibrant daughter and 3 precious grandchildren. Their voices echoed with a profound, almost superhuman level of forgiveness and dignity. They explicitly declared that they would not let hatred and vengeance consume their souls, choosing instead to honor the radiant love and beautiful light that Shanann had always brought into the world. That monumental display of mercy only served to magnify the pathetic, hollow, and vicious nature of the monster sitting silently across the room. The deafening strike of the judge's gavel echoed like a final, ironclad period to this horrifying tragedy, officially closing one of the most shocking chapters in American criminal history. Chris Watts was handed 5 consecutive life sentences without the absolute possibility of parole, the ultimate price for the apocalyptic devastation he had unleashed upon his own blood. The heavy steel doors of a maximum security prison slammed shut permanently, condemning his physical body to a lifetime of extreme isolation and sterile walls. Today, Chris Watts is nothing more than a ghost of a man, rotting away in a tiny concrete cell, forever haunted by the horrific ghosts of his own making, and banished from the sunlight of freedom for the rest of his natural life. The Watts family case is officially closed, but the agonizing questions and the deep societal scars it left behind will never truly fade away. It stands as a chilling, razor-sharp warning about the darkest corners of the human psyche and the literal monsters that can comfortably hide behind the pristine illusion of perfection and glowing social media feeds. This incomprehensible tragedy forces us to confront a bitter, terrifying reality. Sometimes the devil doesn't lurk in the dark alleys or wear the face of a stranger. Sometimes the devil wears a tailored suit, smiles perfectly for the family Christmas card, and the person kissing you goodnight is actually the deadliest nightmare you never saw coming. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this heartbreaking, suspenseful, and deeply chilling journey into the darkest depths of the human mind. What are your thoughts on the true underlying motives that drove Chris Watts to completely abandon his humanity? Do you think there are still hidden psychological puzzles regarding this case that remain unsolved? Please drop your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. We would love to read your perspectives. If this deep dive kept you on the edge of your seat, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming investigations into the world's most baffling and terrifying true crime mysteries. Stay safe out there, and we will see you in the next video.